Hello, everybody. We are in our last session here of Backstories of the Bible, session 12. So we're going to finish with the Dirty Dozen.
And that was the number of perfection, or one of them, right?
That's God's dominion.
Oh, my bad. See, I wasn't paying attention.
I just let Maureen ramble every week. It's good. She feeds me, I ramble. It's good.
Yep, pretty much.
So the last one we're going to do is miracles in the Bible. So it's one of those things that there's all these miraculous things that happen in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you look back and you're trying to remember who did that or why was it important. So what I did is I went through a website that talked about miracles of the Bible, and it said, okay, there's roughly 120 and sorted them by categories. And then I went back and checked, and I realized I left a couple out. There's a little more than 120. But as I was looking at the different miracles that are recorded in the Old Testament, which is 66% of them, the Old Testament's like this thick, right. The New Testament's like this. So logical that the overwhelming majority would be in the Old Testament. Yeah. But I was looking at them and I started to categorize them. Okay, where are there miracles in common? And where are they not in common? Mm-hmm. And so I am a retired intelligence officer, and I'm always looking for patterns. So there's a pattern. So I stepped back 2 days ago, and I went, oh, there is a pattern. There's certain miracles in common, but the purpose of the miracle is different. Mm-hmm. So I was absolutely fascinated because when I stepped back and just very objectively looked at it, the overwhelming majority of the miracles I could find in the Old Testament were negative things. Okay. So there was things like destruction and fire and earthquakes and people being struck with leprosy and plagues and boils. But there's a lot of it is negative, but it's what are people doing when you're reading the old stories, especially when you get to the prophets who performed a lot of the miracles? People are just blatantly misbehaving.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think in the Old Testament you see more of that negativity where everyone's just like constantly pushing against God. Whereas in the New Testament, like, it's not that we don't have that, but you notice a lot of people are just doing their best to follow the Jewish law. And that's where we get pushback, is them trying so hard to be Jewish instead of leaving Judaism, which is kind of interesting.
No, it's very true, because Jesus comes to be the fulfillment of the law. This is what you being righteous would look like if you guys did this, right? Yeah. It's not the 613 laws we get out of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Right. It's not that. God gave you 12, we gave you 10 commandments. You guys couldn't do that. So you're certainly not going to do 613.
You're definitely. Let's not even think about that.
So Jesus gets it down to just 2. But it's very interesting because in the Old Testament, God's trying to build a relationship, and we start with the first family, and then we move to a tribe, and then we move to a nation, right? Mm-hmm. And that is a really tough haul, because you're pulling people in from all their world, comparatively speaking to ours, was small. Mm-hmm. But geographically speaking, for them, without cars and planes and buses, it was a long trip to go to any of these other countries. And they hadn't been spoken to by God. So they didn't have that relationship.
That direct, yeah. Okay.
So they're interacting with these people of all these bizarre and often violent and bloody behaviors. Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense that we keep encountering all these people and these bad things are happening, that what happens is the consequence of your behavior, and a lot of that is going to be negative. And then when we shift towards Jesus, and we've got the temple's been rebuilt and the Pharisees and Sadducees are in place, but unfortunately they're aligning themselves with Rome. But there are people, like you said, trying to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. So he steps into that space and says, okay, we've been around for a long time, you guys. You understand what the laws are. You understand how to be a good person. This is what it looks like. Mm-hmm. And his miracles are all positive. Instead of destructive, they're constructive. I just thought it was fascinating. Just fascinating. So we'll start with the Old Testament one. First category is, and I didn't even know this one, multiplication of food. So you think multiplication of food, what do you think of? Who do you think of?
Well, there's when Jesus was preaching and teaching, and the loaves and the fishes, and feeding the 5,000 or something like that?
Yeah. So the multiplication of food, and I always think of multiplication of food is a Jesus miracle. But then you go back and you actually realize some of the prophets of old did multiplication of food. Okay. And it started, it was one of those, the light goes on, multiplication of food. And the first one would be Moses in the desert when God says the manna. Mm. So that went on for years, right? And this strange bread-like substance, and they would go out and gather it every day. And then they started complaining about, we need some protein here. We need some meat. And God sent, sounds like quails. And they would just gather them up. And that's the first time you see the multiplication of food. Mm. And you go through it, and then, I don't want to mess this one up, I think it's Elijah, when Elijah is called to help the widow and her son.
Yes, and she makes her last loaf for him or whatever.
Yeah.
And then she ends up having like enough for the rest of the year.
Yeah. So he asked her if she will feed him, and she said, "Well, I don't have much left. I'm just baking my last loaf of bread for my son and I, and then we're going to lay down and die because we're out of food."
So you want to join us? It'll be a great evening, filled with joy and laughter.
But when he intervenes in her life, and then she ends up giving him a place to live for a while, they never run out of food. And when the drought is over, the miraculous replenishing of the bread and the oil stops. But I just had to start going, multiplication of food besides Jesus, where does that happen? So where else do you think multiplication of food happens?
Well, we have the desert, we have the fishes, there's the wedding at Cana.
Yep.
Which I guess is not technically food, but
I would argue that, yeah, that would count.
Yeah.
That
I can't
counts.
think of any Old Testament ones, though.
So we just did the widow's meal, and then I found another one, and we talked about this last week, or maybe the week before. So when Elijah's just done, these people are so wicked. I'm just done. I'm gonna go lay down in the desert and die. I'm done. So Elijah lays down to die, and God says, I don't think you're done yet, buddy, and sends the ravens to feed him.
What are you doing?
Get up.
He's like, no, leave me alone. I'm ready to die. You're being so dramatic. Here.
But what an idea. Ravens show up to feed Elijah and drop food in his mouth.
Instead of eat food, right? Because ravens are like eat people and flesh and things.
Well, yeah, if there's roadkill, yeah.
Right.
But when you think about this, because I learned this from my kids, the way mama birds feed baby birds is they put the food in their mouth and they chew it up and then they spit it into their baby's mouth. So like my son said, so they basically regurgitate into their children's mouth. Yeah, that is actually what they do.
Delicious.
But these ravens come and feed Elijah, who's just decided he's done. He's just done. And the other one was I apologize if I mispronounced this, the Shunammite. The Shunammite woman's oil, and she's a widow, and she goes to the prophet and she says they're going to take my sons because I can't pay my debt and my husband's dead, so they're going to take my sons and sell them into slavery. Can you help me? And he says, well, what do you have? And she's kind of replies, well, I don't have much. She's got oil. So he says, basically go back home and then go ask all of your neighbors to give you jars. So she does. She goes back and asks, can you imagine knocking on people's doors? Do you have any extra jars?
Bing bong. Hello. Can I have your Tupperware, please?
So you talk about walking out of faith. This prophet says, go ask your neighbors if they have jars and they'll give them to you. So she does. She goes to all the neighbors. She asks for the jars. They give them jars. And he said, and then pour whatever oil you have left into the jars. And the oil never runs out. And then he says, and then sell what you have. And she ends up having so much oil that she can pay off all of her debt and live free from the fear of her sons being sold. So it's just, I hadn't realized that the multiplication of food really goes back that far. And when you think about it, that's just such a basic human need. You need water, you need fluid, you need food, you need a safe place to live, and you need a way to pay for your life. The 4 basic human needs. Yeah. And this guy, she gets a way to pay, and she gets food, right? Just amazing. And then there's another one, and I just read this one. So the multiplication of food in Kings. So there was 100 men were fed with 20 barley loaves and corn and ears of corn.
When was this?
Yeah, so this is in Kings, 2 Kings 4:42. And it's one of those things, because I have a tendency to read through the Old Testament and not remember it as much.
Yes.
So when
it kind of blends together, doesn't it?
It's like, I don't remember that one.
I don't remember that. Yes.
But 100 men were fed with 20 barley loaves and ears of corn at Gilgal. And another one is, this was interesting. I think it was Elisha. Elisha. So the men were getting ready to eat, and one of the servants of Elisha gets the food ready, and something he does, he gathers local herbs and he throws in the pot of porridge or pottage, and not realizing it's poisonous. So the men start to eat and immediately feel sick, and they say, there's death in this pot, there's death in this pot. And the prophet intervenes, crunches something up, throws it in the pot, and says, you'll be fine. And everybody's fine. just amazing.
Yeah. Well, I've never heard that story.
Yeah.
Ever. Shows you how much I read the Bible.
Well, it just goes back. I really, this was fun for me, going back and trying to find these stories when it's like, here's what it was like in the Old Testament, here's what it's like in the New Testament. So when you look at that, most of those ones, the miracles of food in the Old Testament are all positive. We're saving somebody's life, we're giving them a livelihood, right? That is about the only one that I could see transferred over well to the New Testament.
I think that culturally, I mean, food now is food, right? But a lot of the time, and for a lot of history, food has been a huge part of culture. And, there's a lot of importance and symbolism behind eating together. And as you said, it was a basic need, but it was also a form of commerce more so than it is now. And so I think maybe that would be why some of these miracles and or the parables that Jesus shared later, because he shared a couple more parables that were similar about multiplying of whatever, money or gifts, and that would be more impactful for them because of the importance of food in their culture.
Yep.
So
if you jump forward to that one, so the first miracle we know from Jesus is multiplying the wine. So that's a big deal. And then we have the two different stories when he's surrounded by thousands of people and he takes a small amount of food and ends up feeding everybody. And then, interesting enough, how many baskets of food are left over? 12. So there's that number 12 again. 12 disciples, 12 judges, 12
God's
sons of
dominion.
Yeah, God's 12 sons of Jacob or Israel. So there's the number 12. But the multiplication of food is really, literally and symbolically, God reaching down to feed us. Here, I need you. You're in human form right now. You need this to live. So I'm going to reach down exactly where you are at your huge basic human need. I'm going to feed you. Because really, if you're hungry, you're not going to pay attention to much else.
No. Hence being hangry.
Yeah. But I just thought that was really interesting, the multiplication of food. So there's one, I counted four in the New Testament. And then I think I counted 5 in the Old Testament. Let's see, 5 in the Old Testament. But then we go to the next one. This one really blew me away. The resurrection story. Okay, so think about that. How many people can you think of you hear about there being resurrected from the dead in the Bible?
There's the soldier's daughter, right?
Yep.
Of course, Lazarus.
Yep.
And there's one more, and I can't remember.
Isn't it Peter's mother-in-law?
She wasn't dead, to my understanding. Okay. She was going to die, and then Christ came in and healed her. She had like a fever or something. Where was that? I was reading over there. Yeah.
Okay, so
I don't think she was dead though.
I'm not dead yet. I'm getting better.
I'm getting better.
So I'm just making sure I get this correctly. So in the New Testament, so Lazarus is raised from the dead. Jairus' daughter is raised. Jesus Christ is resurrected from the dead. And I know there's one more.
Raising of the widow's son.
Right.
Nain.
None. Okay, but out of those 4 in the New Testament, this was the other big aha moment. So Jesus raises other people from the dead, but he dies and God resurrects him. So it's just a different resurrection story. So he's definitely dead, and God brings him back. So Jesus doesn't raise himself from the dead, an external force does. And in the other stories, Jesus is the external force that reaches down and brings somebody back to life.
Yeah.
So where do you think there's resurrection stories in the Old Testament? So one of them is actually Elisha's bones are used to revive the dead. After Elisha's already gone, somebody is in this place where he's buried, and when his bones touch this other person, they come back to life.
Oh.
So you hear there's a couple Christian songs about dry bones come back to life, and that's what they're referring to.
Oh, okay.
And then there's one where Elisha is just like most of the prophets, they wander, right? And they have their people
All
who
over
wander
the
with
place.
them.
Yeah.
And there's a woman who tells her husband, and they're pretty well off. She says, this man is obviously a godly man. When he comes through town, we should give him a place to stay. So they take their rooftop and they give him a room up there. They turn it into a room for him. So Elisha always has a place to stay. And she's barren. So finally, Elisha asked one of his servants, so to speak, is there anything we can do for this woman? And he says, well, she doesn't have any children. So he tells the woman, bring her here. And he says, you're going to have a son. And her reaction is kind of like, oh, please don't tease me. That's not funny. He said, no, you're going to have a child. And sure enough, she has a child. And of course, she's ecstatic. And time passes, and the child's old enough now to go out with his dad, to go out in the field. And something happens, and the son gets terribly sick. And the father brings him in his arms and goes back to home to tell his wife. And of course, she's freaking out. And she tells her servants, go find him. Go find the holy man. Go find the holy man. And she says, I'm coming. And I think she probably gets on a donkey or something, and she goes out to meet him. And she says, why did you do this to me? You promised me this son, and then he's taken from me. It would have been better, basically, if you had never given me a son. Right. And he says, I will come back, and I will see the boy. And he literally lays on top of him and breathes into the child. Puts his whole body on top of him and breathes into the child. And the child comes back to life.
Incredible.
Interesting story, huh?
Yeah. I don't know anything about Elisha.
And most of us confuse Elijah with Elisha.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Elijah is often seen as the greatest prophet. So when Jesus has his transformation, his transfiguration up there, he's in between Moses and Elijah. And that's very symbolic because Moses is the law, and I am the fulfillment of the law.
Oh, right.
And Elijah was considered to be the greatest prophet. And Elijah did lots of miracles. Interestingly enough, Elisha did a lot more miracles than Elijah. So I was thinking about that. I said, well, how come we don't hear about Elisha? We hear about Elijah. And it's because the Jewish people believed he was the greatest prophet. And he was the greatest prophet before this Messiah was coming. But how did Elisha get to be so powerful? And when he's basically the right hand for Elijah, and when Elijah's getting close to death, or he knows his life is over, 3 times they're walking along and he tries to say, you stay there, I'm going to go over here. And he says it differently each time. And each time Elijah goes, no, I'm not leaving you. No, I'm not leaving you. No, I'm not leaving you. So he says, well, what can I do for you, my son? And it's just powerful words right there, my son, because the prophet wouldn't have had any kids, right? So this is his adoptive son. Yeah. And in the Jewish culture, the oldest son got 2 times more inheritance than the other ones, right? That's just how this works. So the oldest one usually scored, and the youngest one's got a much smaller portion. So Elisha looks at him, and he said, Father, he calls him Father, I'm your adoptive son. Give me 2 times, basically, your spiritual gifts. Give me 2 times the normal inheritance. And Elisha kind of says, that's going to be hard to do, because God gave him these gifts. He goes, that's going to be hard to do. But if you see me leaving, if you see me and my death, and you see my spirit moving, you will have the gifts. And sure enough, Elisha sees Elijah, his
when
spirit,
he was taken on the chariot.
and he has twice the spiritual power.
That's cool.
Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, that's really cool.
Pretty cool. I had to catch that one, because I had to understand, okay, what is the symbology there? Father, son. Oh, and they actually use the words, you're my adoptive son, you're my spiritual father. Use that. Okay, but now we get to the miracles that in the Old Testament are just kind of bad things, right? So I was sitting in the car this morning getting the oil changed, and I had another one of those aha moments. And it was talking about supernatural miracles. Okay, here it is. It's a compound word, right? Supernatural. So are natural events that just are out of context, completely unexpected or over the top. So they're supernatural. But when I looked at it, the natural events in the Old Testament were almost all negative. So when Moses would go up on the mountain, and they would be thunder and lightning, and the earth would shake, and the people down below are like, oh no, he's talking to God. Because this is terrifying. There's thunder and lightning, and the earth is shaking. It's an earth shake or earthquake. But when I looked at it, most of those miracles were almost all frightening things. So fire that comes out of nowhere. So when I went back and looked at it, there's water ones and there's fire ones. And the water one, what's a water miracle everybody knows from the Old Testament?
Oh, well. there's the water coming out of the stone
Yes.
from Moses
Uh-huh.
hitting the rock.
Yep. What's another one? Moses. You're on the right track.
He also caused the river, the Nile, to turn into blood.
Yeah. Yeah. So the water is no longer drinkable, and nothing's going to live in it. So that's a negative thing. So
Just a little bit.
And then the frogs come out of the water, right?
Right.
When the frogs come out of the water, they infest everything, and then the frogs die, and it draws flies. Right? So
Yeah.
that first miracle, ruin the water, leads to the frogs, which leads to the fly, which leads to all the awful illness that comes with all those kind of things, right? That's a really supernatural event that has really negative connotations.
Yeah.
But a positive one starts out positive, and depending on your perspective, could be negative, but it starts out positive. So finally, Pharaoh lets them go.
Right.
And they're on the edge of the Red Sea.
Right, the Red Sea.
And the water splits and they walk through it, right? The water just divides and they walk through it. So, yeah, if you're Hebrew, like, yes! Go through. But that's a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then as soon as the Egyptians started going to the water, it crashes down on them.
Yeah.
So that's like a negative side of this story. Because really, after having been a soldier for 26 years, you're basically just doing what you're told.
Right.
You know, most of those people are not decision makers. They're just doing what they're told, and they're just drowned at sea right there. Drowned at sea.
Yeah.
So that one has positive and negative things. But you already got that. We got water from. There's two different times when we get water. When the Israelites are out there, the Hebrews are out there for 40 years in the desert. There's two different times when you get water. And then one time in Exodus where the water is really bitter. And I don't remember what Moses does, and it gets sweetened so you can...
Right, so they can drink it.
And really for us, like when I moved here to Eagle, Idaho, the water here was terrible. It all smelled like sulfur. It came out of your tap smelling like sulfur.
Yeah.
So it probably, you're not going to drink that. It stinks.
It does. It's rough.
So I'm very grateful. Whoever does the water around here in Eagle, the water's good now.
Yeah.
So those are nice things. But then you move on to what are the water miracles in the New Testament?
Well, Jesus walks on water, of course.
Yeah.
Water is turned into wine. Water... I was reading through these.
He calms the Sea of Galilee.
Right. Yep.
He commands a whole sea to calm down. So those are three positive ones.
Yes.
So there's some positive water ones based in the Old Testament. All of the ones in the New Testament are positive. But the other thing about that the really big destructive one in the Old Testament, of course, is the Great Flood.
Right. Right. Noah.
And it goes on for
adventure.
roughly 40 days, which 40 always means like a big passage of time, a big change or something. So it wipes out all of these things. And then that's the miracle when God says, okay, next time it won't be water, it'll be fire. So I said, okay, God says it's not going to be water, it's going to be fire next time. So then I start flipping through, I go, well, are there any fire miracles in the New Testament? And I couldn't find any. But there's a bunch in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And again, it's God, people are just misbehaving. And it's just consequence of your behavior. So what are some of the negative fire ones? Can you think of any in the Old Testament?
Well, you have the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right?
You have, I mean, God was the pillar of fire. That's not necessarily negative, but
Yeah.
there's that one. And there's also, he appeared to Moses in a burning bush.
Those are two of the positive ones I could find, because the rest were all destruction.
Yeah.
And the people would have been very afraid of fire, because that was before you had fire brigades. It's not like a fire truck's going to pull up and put the fire out. It's just going to keep burning and destroy your crops.
Right.
It's going to kill your cattle.
There was a bunch of like smaller ones all
Yep.
over the place in the Old Testament where, people would either lie or not tell the whole truth or, disobey God or whatever it was, and it just kind of ended very poorly for them.
There's one story which God sends a fire down on a whole bunch of soldiers, and 250 of them are incinerated right there. And then there's the challenge between the Hebrew prophets who are being persecuted and killed, and then the prophets of Baal. And it's kind of like the standoff, like the dance-off between the prophets, and then God sends fire down and destroys everything
Right, the stone, the water,
everything is disintegrated. Well, that would have scared the heck out of everybody, right?
Yeah. I could just imagine the prophet standing there like, yeah.
Yeah. So I got to find there was a couple of other fire ones. So from Numbers 16:35 through 45, there came out a fire from the Lord and consumed 250 particular men. So let's see. Another fire one. This is out of the Exodus. So they're out in the desert. It's probably hot. It's the desert. It says, the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. And that's from Numbers 21:6.
Does fiery serpent mean does it mean the frilled lizard thing maybe? Or does it mean supernatural lizards that were on fire?
I don't know.
Because you always read that, and I think we just kind of glance over it, but it's why did they specifically use the term? Is that just a poor translation?
Well, and then why are there so many myths across the planet, different cultures, about fire-breathing dragons?
Yeah. Well, in the Genesis, in the creation story, it's actually said that the devil appeared as a dragon. Mm-hmm. And then when God cursed him, he said, and you will crawl on your belly, and then it became a snake.
And then we see it again in Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
The dragon is the bad thing. So whatever these fire-breathing serpents, and serpent certainly meant dragon as well. So fire is really not a good thing. And then in 2 Kings, fire came down from heaven, and Ahaziah's captains were consumed by fire from heaven near Samaria. Mm-hmm. But it's just, we know that there's lots of, especially living in Idaho, that lightning strikes will start fire. But these ones seem to be rather specific and directed behaviors.
Very much and done.
Yeah, so, and then I couldn't find a single, so that's a very destructive force. Fire is a very destructive force. I couldn't find a single fire miracle in the New Testament. So when you think about fire, really is necessary for warmth, but in all of these circumstances, it's a negative thing, except for the burning bush.
Right.
And but it's a negative thing. Couldn't find any parallel in the New Testament.
Yeah, no, there's not a single one. There's more water.
Yep.
Which water is water produces life.
Yep.
And maintains it. And so I think maybe there's something there regarding symbolism. There was no need to use a destructive force because Christ was coming to, you will never be thirsty again. I am the bread of life. And all of that. So it's I'm building up this church. I want there to be unity. I want there to be peace, and I want to cultivate life here. I don't want to take it away.
Right that was the message I kept seeing in the pattern of what was happening there, because the other times we see water is when the people cross over the Jordan into the promised land, which is a positive thing.
Yeah.
And then you see the baptism of Jesus in the water, and then the clouds part. So that's a very positive experience with water. A lot of the other ones were negative floods.
Positive is such a gentle word. The Trinity was revealed, but it's fine.
And then the other one that I really hadn't thought about before was miraculous conception stories. So we always think of Mary.
There's so many.
Yeah,
there's so many.
You don't even think about it. So what are the two that I think of right away are Mary's conceived without sin, right? And the other one is the conception of Jesus through the Holy Spirit. So those are two.
John the Baptist.
So that's three.
Rachel? No.
Oh, now you bounce back to the Old Testament, because there's a similar number in the Old Testament.
There's a lot in the Old Testament.
But I had never stopped back and looked at those two things too, the parallel construction of miraculous conception. So we've got the miraculous conception of Jesus and John, because his parents were very older, and then Mary's conceived without original sin. And then we go back to Sarah, right? So I think Sarah was supposed to be 90 when she conceived Isaac. And then we got Hannah. And Hannah couldn't have any kids, and she's the one who dedicated her son. Look, if you will let me have a child, I will dedicate my son to you. And she literally brings him to the temple, and that's Samuel. And then there was one other one, but I couldn't find it. But I remember there were three in the Old Testament as well. And I hadn't thought of that before. A similar thing. Similar numbers.
That was something that stuck out to me. I felt like that was like repeated over and over. It's like every single woman couldn't have children. Is what it felt like to me. I was like, why are they all barren? Stop eating whatever you're eating.
Yeah, I guess you could say Rachel, because Rachel and Jacob were married for a while and she just couldn't conceive.
Right, and that's what caused all the jealousy.
Yeah. And then Rachel's son becomes the favorite of her husband, so that's where we get Joseph and Benjamin from.
Right.
Yeah, and like you taught me, a lot of them got kids because they were just not willing to wait for God. Like they were just ticked and like, just hang out there a little longer. It all comes in God's time, which is hard for all of us. It all comes in God's time.
Men.
So then the last one that is really indicative of the transition from the Old Testament to the New Testament is if Jesus is coming to remind us that we're children of God and we're beloved of God and God wants us to do well and to be well, like I have come that you might have life and that more abundantly, is the number of healings that occur. And in the Old Testament, we're smiting people with boils and leprosy,
lightning, death, blood,
and then
dead.
Some people just die. Like two guys look into the Ark of the Covenant and they die. One guy accidentally touches it because it's falling, and he touches it and he dies. And there's a lot of sickness and illness that shows up in the New Testament, in the Old Testament. Like these things happen to people.
God was a little touchy in the Old Testament.
Yeah, they get these sicknesses and like 25,000 people die of this or whatever it is. And then in the New Testament, I just noticed, I didn't see that story being told, but what I did see is just over and over and over again, all the healings in the New Testament. Okay, with the transition, you've got the Messiahs come. I sent my son here to help you guys get your stuff together and learn how to be faithful and righteous. And I captured very quickly 20 healing stories for Jesus.
Yeah.
So we're not smiting people with things. We're actually healing all these awful things. The 10 lepers who show up, right?
Yeah.
And the woman who hemorrhaged for 12 years and nothing helped her. Jesus heals people from blindness. He heals them from deafness. That's the God who steps in and says, I love you. I want you to have life and that more abundantly. If you will walk in the right path, I can help you, but you have to get on the path.
Yeah.
Get on the path.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to sink in your own mire, that's kind of on you. But
that's your choice there, buddy.
But it's interesting because Jesus tells people, like the woman at the well, he says things like, go and sin no more. No, don't draw any more negative things to yourself by your behavior. Don't draw any more negative consequences. Go and stay on the path. But it's just so striking to me. He does at least 20 recorded miracles. And then it says Peter walked by after the Holy Spirit comes into him. Peter will walk by and people will be healed. He's just walking by.
I hear you. Yeah. Well, and there's not only, as you said, the recorded ones, the very specific stories. It's like, oh, this guy's hand was healed, or Jesus made mud and put it on his eyes. All those stories. But then there's the countless amounts that are just kind of like mentioned, and it's like, and then Jesus spent the whole day healing, and it's like, what does that mean? Like, does that mean he healed 100 people? Does that mean he healed 1,000 people? Like, what is, there's just all these big, huge sections, which I really appreciated the Chosen kind of taking the time to illustrate that in the series.
Oh,
because there was just these scenes, one in particular that I watched, and all the apostles are like fighting and grumpy and tired because they've spent all day helping Jesus with the crowds, and it's like he spent all day, sun up, sun down, healing people. And we don't think about that. It's like, oh, well, he did some miracles here and some miracles there, and like you were lucky if you got healed. And in reality, it was like if you went to Jesus and said, I need your help and I know that you're the one, boom.
Yep.
Like that was it. It wasn't like this whole like, maybe I will, maybe I won't type thing.
Yeah. And then I think one of the passages is, and people came from all towns and brought the sick to him. So you can just imagine the people on the road. Just, flocking. Where is he?
Yeah, where is he at? Do you know where he is? He's that way. All right.
Yeah, and it's so bad that he gets on a boat and goes out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee.
Right.
Like, well, I need to rest.
I need a quick second. Yeah.
But it's really just when you step back and you look at the comparison, the juxtaposition of the miracles in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Some of the ones in the Old Testament, similar things, water, supernatural events, multiplication of food. The overwhelming majority in the Old Testament that we get are, as my dad used to always say, there will be much wailing and gnashing of teeth.
Yes.
It's negative stuff. And the overwhelming majority in the New Testament are positive and healing and God reaching down, you're my family, I want you to be well.
Yeah.
Just such a difference.
Yeah. Big
Such
time.
a difference. So
Big
I did
time.
point out in one of those ones, one of the few things where somebody got smited. So
Done been smoked.
this is after Jesus already passed away and the disciples are out there, the apostles are out there, and people are coming to them. And people would sell their goods, sell their house, sell their farm, because they thought the end times were coming.
Right.
And they would sell whatever they had and give it to the disciples for their ministry and to help people. And there's this one couple where they say, well, we're going to sell our land and we're going to bring the money to you. So they sell the land and the husband shows up and he does it and he says, well, this is what we got. And I think it's Peter. And he says, are you sure that's all you had? And he goes, yeah, that's all we had. And God strikes him dead right there.
Oh, okay.
So they haul him out. Whoop! A little while later.
Peter's like, you shouldn't have lied.
And a little while later, the wife shows up, not knowing the husband's dead. And she gets questioned the same thing. And she goes, no, we gave you everything we had. Whoop, she's dead. Like, whoo.
You shouldn't have lied.
It's like, there's one issue of smiting there. Consequences for your behavior.
That's so aggressive.
But I really enjoyed studying this because it made me step back and go, okay, how many miracles are there? And then Jesus, he actually asked, they said, why did you go out to see John the baptizer in the desert? Why did you go out? Were you looking for miracles? Because he knows people are looking for miracles. It's exciting to be around a miracle worker.
Yeah.
It's exciting to be a disciple of a miracle worker, and he knows that. And there's that whole thing that said, and John says, and I'm not even worthy to take off his sandals. He who is coming after me is even greater than me.
Right.
But even John's disciples are sent to Jesus. And John, when he's in prison, he's not going to make it much. So he goes, you go ask Jesus. He
Yeah.
goes, go ask him who you are.
Don't ask me anymore.
Yeah, don't ask me. And he sends him over here. And interestingly enough, Jesus, who wants to be known for being more than miracle worker, because all those miracles open your eyes to God. That's what they do. He turns them back around to John and says, and he's quoting Isaiah, and he says, and the blind see, and the deaf hear, and the lame walk. So he's turning around and just reminding the disciples of the miracles that Isaiah said were going to happen. I'm the guy. So even Jesus understands the power of taking the tremendous gift he's been having to turn around and say, I'm him. It's in the Old Testament. I'm him. So I just thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Ooh. Well, guys, we made it through. Last episode. Hope you guys learned something. I know I learned a lot. So thank you for taking the time to put the work into this, because it was a lot of work. A lot of work.
It was really fun work.
Oh, good. That's good.
I love reaching back, telling the backstories of the Bible. We talked about some of the bad boys of the Bible. Like,
Yeah.
there's some seriously bad guys in the bad boys in the Bible. And then the one that I think everybody feels better about this is when you realize the people who were called, how many of them questioned. Like we talked about Gideon last time. We talked about Moses. How many of them said, well, I don't think I'm your guy.
Right.
No, I'm sure you could find somebody else.
Yeah.
But it's just so helpful for me to go, all these people who God moved from zero to hero, all of these people had doubts, all of these people have fears, and look what God does with just regular people.
Right.
When you finally say, okay, not my will, but yours, not my will. So for me, it's just so fun to go find all these backstories.
And that's an overarching theme, the call to those who seem the lowest, or the lowliest, excuse me. I mean, you see that in the Old Testament and the New Testament. I mean, Moses and all of them, they were all the same. Like, don't call me. I'm not great. I'm not fancy. I know nothing, or I'm a fisherman, or I'm literally homeless on the street, or whatever it is. And it's like, no, you are all called to love one another and to follow me and my Father. And so do not be afraid, I guess, is the moral of the story there.
Yeah, and like when we heard about when Jesus is taken to the temple after he's born, and the widow's been there for 70 years.
Yep.
Waiting.
Waiting.
And then she's so excited about this that she says she goes out and tells everybody. The big message is even an elderly lady. God can do incredible things through you, me, no matter where we are.
Yeah.
We just have to acknowledge, okay, I don't think I have a whole lot to offer, but whatever I have is yours, so have at it.
Yeah. pray about your skills, do self-reflection, realize what your skills are, and then just share in the best way that you find, whether it come up in conversation, whether it's something more direct like in podcasting or whatever it is. But don't be afraid to have those conversations, because people are listening whether you realize it or not.
Well, like you doing this podcasting thing. Podcasting is such a powerful way to tell a story. It's visual, it's audio, right? It's a powerful way to tell a story. That's a tremendous gift. Tremendous gift. It's much more powerful for me to see somebody speaking and hear them at the same time instead of just hear them speaking. I'm much more likely to remember it if I actually connected a face to the voice.
Yeah.
So it's a huge gift. So thank you for sharing your gift with me.
Absolutely. Alrighty, guys. Well, this is the last of this series. We may have more series together in the future. I'm hoping to have her on the Salt podcast at some point as well. So be on the lookout for that kind of stuff. Please go check out our YouTube page for our other series that we have going on. I'm actually going to be starting a new series, Cooking with Scripture with Chef Lou Aaron, and we're going to be going through Scripture. And of course, it's going to be more directed on the food aspect of Scripture and the importance that it has in Scripture, as well as, of course, he'll get to cook the recipes and you can follow along. So it'll be really, really fun. Please check that out. Follow the podcast on Instagram, because I have all my behind the scenes stuff there, so you can, as Maureen said, put a face to all of the voices that you're hearing, because it's a little boring if you're just like, oh, cool sound, you know? Anyway, guys, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Bye-bye. God bless.